You ever look at an NBA All-Star and think, this guy had to be a 5-star recruit, right? Well, not always. Some of the biggest names in the league today barely got a sniff from top colleges. No blue blood offers, no hype, just raw talent, insane work ethic, and a chip on their shoulder so big it needed its own locker. We're talking JUCOs, mid-majors, NAIA schools, spots most top recruits wouldn't touch with a 10-foot rim. But these guys didn't just survive there, they thrived, built their game from the ground up, and forced the world to pay attention. Today, we'll be breaking down the wild college journeys of NBA stars who went from barely recruited to basketball royalty. Jimmy Butler, slept on. Kawhi Leonard, barely talked about. Dennis Rodman, you won't believe where he started. And that's just the beginning. So settle in, because these stories are proof that stars aren't always born. Sometimes they're built in the shadows. Let's kick things off with a guy who made mid-majors cool again and put Weber State on the basketball map. Damian Lillard. When you think Dame, you think deep threes from the parking lot, stone-cold game winners, and of course, Dame time. But back in high school, Dame wasn't exactly must-see TV. Why? For one, he was 5'5" as a freshman, barely taller than the clipboard. And even though he still made varsity at that height, huge respect, college scouts weren't exactly throwing scholarships at the short kid who kept transferring schools. He bounced between multiple high schools, making it hard for recruiters to track him or take him seriously. By the time he hit his growth spurt and started cooking, the recruiting window had basically slammed shut. So instead of Duke or Kentucky, Lillard ended up at Weber State, a quiet little school in Utah playing in the Big Sky Conference. Not exactly ESPN primetime, but Dame didn't care. From day one, he went off, dropping nearly 20 a game as a freshman, then leveling up every year after that. Still, nobody was paying attention. Weber wasn't on TV. Dame didn't have a mixtape going viral, and scouts kept asking, can he really do this against NBA talent? Dame's response? A resounding, watch this. Long answer, he got picked 6th in the 2012 draft, came up with a chip the size of Oakland, and hasn't looked back since. Multiple All-Star nods, All-NBA teams, iconic playoff daggers. You know the drill. He didn't just arrive, he made the league his. But if you think Dame had it tough, wait till you hear this next story. Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler's path to the league doesn't sound real. It sounds like something they made up for a motivational TikTok. He didn't just have a slow start to his basketball career, he barely had a stable life to begin with. At 13, Jimmy got kicked out of his house. No stability, no backup plan, just a teenager crashing on friends' couches and trying to survive. But through it all, he kept one thing constant. He hooped. In high school, he played at Tomball, Texas. Solid player, nothing flashy, no buzz, no scouts waiting in the bleachers with clipboards. He averaged decent numbers, but when senior year ended, 0 Division I offers. Not one. So he took the only shot he had, Tyler Junior College. No fanfare, no spotlight, just grind. He kept pushing, showing flashes, playing hard-nosed defense, doing the dirty work, and finally, Marquette took notice. He transferred in, started on the bench, and worked his way up until he became the ultimate glue guy. Tough, unshakable, clutch when it mattered. Still, the NBA wasn't sold. He went 30th in the 2011 draft, barely made the cut. But in true Jimmy fashion, he clawed his way to the top. All-star, Olympian, finals leader, and one of the fiercest competitors in the game. Jimmy didn't walk the red carpet to the league. He crawled through mud, built his own road, and showed up in boots. And if Butler was all grit, the next guy, he let his game do all the talking because he sure wasn't saying much himself. Kawhi Leonard. Today, Kawhi is one of the most efficient killers in the NBA, but back then, barely a blip on the recruiting radar. Out of high school in Riverside, California, Kawhi wasn't flashy. He didn't play on a big-name AAU team. He wasn't posting wild numbers or dunking on everybody. What was he doing? Grabbing every rebound, locking up the other team's best player, scoring just enough to make them respect him. But it wasn't loud, and scouts love loud. So instead of a top-tier program, he landed at San Diego State, a school known more for football than hoops. But once Kawhi showed up, that gym turned into a fortress. He became the heartbeat, rebounding machine, defensive monster, and the quiet leader of a team that started making serious noise. Still, when the 2011 draft rolled around, teams weren't convinced. Could he score at the next level? Could he handle NBA offense? So he dropped to the 15th pick, which was a bad call. Fast forward, 2 finals MVPs, 2 championships, Defensive Player of the Year, top 75 all time. The board man got paid and made everyone who doubted him eat their scouting reports. Now, we've seen grinders, we've seen slow starters, but we've never seen a journey like this next one. Dennis Rodman. Rodman didn't take the hard road. He took the road that didn't even exist. Seriously, his origin story is wild. In high school, couldn't make varsity. Didn't grow until after graduation. No scouts, no offers. And after school, he wasn't playing college ball. He was mopping floors as a janitor. Then, boom, a growth spurt. Rodman went from 5'9" to 6'7" in a year. That's not a development arc. That feels like a genetic glitch. He starts hooping again. A friend makes a call. Rodman gets 1 semester at Cook County College in Texas where he averaged a double-double, but flunks out due to poor grades. Next stop, Southeastern Oklahoma State, NAIA level. Basically off the basketball grid, but Rodman exploded there. In 3 seasons, he averaged 25.7 points, 15.7 rebounds, and shot 63.7% from the field. He was a 3-time NAIA All-American and led the NAIA in rebounding twice. In 1986, he dropped 46 points and grabbed 32 rebounds in a single tournament game, leading his team to the national semifinals and the highest ranking in school history, number 3 in the nation. Still, NBA scouts weren't sure. Too raw, too weird, too NAIA. He slid to the second round in the 86 draft. And then, he became the most relentless rebounder the league's ever seen. 7 straight rebounding titles, 5 rings, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, a Hall of Fame legacy, all built from absolutely nothing. Rodman didn't take the path, he made one. And stomped all over it in wild outfits, dyed hair, and elite defense. And speaking of wild paths, next up is a guy who started out handing out towels before he was throwing down dunks next to Michael Jordan. Scottie Pippen. If Scottie Pippen's college story was a movie script, you'd reject it for being too unrealistic. Coming out of Hamburg, Arkansas, Pippen had no offers. None. He was a skinny, unknown guard with no scholarships in sight, so he enrolled at Central Arkansas as a walk-on. Not as a player, as the team's equipment manager. Yes, really. Before he was throwing no-look passes to MJ, he was literally folding jerseys. But he kept grinding, practicing, growing. Literally. He hit a crazy growth spurt, shooting up to 6'8", and suddenly the tools started showing. Scoring, rebounding, defending. He could do it all, even though people outside his conference weren't paying attention. By his senior year, NBA scouts were watching. The Bulls saw what others didn't and made a draft night trade with Seattle to grab him as the 5th overall pick in 1987. What came next? Basketball magic. 6 rings, 7 All-Star selections, Hall of Famer, one of the greatest defenders ever, and a player who helped redefine what a modern forward could be. Pippen went from towel boy to top 75 all time. No shortcuts, no handouts, just pure grind. This next guy? He didn't grow up dreaming of the NBA. He barely knew what it was, and yet he made it. Pascal Siakam. While most NBA stars were perfecting crossovers in elementary school, Pascal Siakam was kicking soccer balls in Cameroon. No AAU circuits, no youth basketball camps, just a kid who didn't touch a basketball seriously until he was 17. But what he did have was pure hustle. Pascal played like someone racing against the clock, because he was. He was behind the curve, and he knew it. But his motor? Unreal. He caught the attention of Basketball Without Borders, and just like that, the kid who barely knew how to post up landed a spot at New Mexico State, a mid-major with zero spotlight. But Pascal didn't need lights. He needed a gym. In his final season, he averaged 20 points, 11 boards, and took home WAC Player of the Year. Scouts started whispering, and Toronto listened. The Raptors took him late in the first round in 2016, and within a few years, he was an all-star, the league's most improved player, and a key piece of the 2019 championship team. Not bad for a guy who didn't know the NBA was a thing until his teens. Now, from a late bloomer to someone who didn't bloom at all, according to the draft, Ben Wallace. Ben Wallace didn't take the traditional route to NBA greatness. He didn't go to a big-name school, didn't get national media coverage, and when draft night came in 1996, he wasn't picked at all. Coming out of Virginia Union, a Division II school, Wallace was a problem. Monster on the glass, shot-blocking menace, defense-first beast. But none of that mattered to scouts. All they saw was his height, 6'9". Too short to play center, they said. Not enough offense. Not flashy enough. So, draft night 1996 comes and goes, and Ben Wallace doesn't hear his name once. But he didn't pout. He packed a lunch and went to work. Wallace signed with the Washington Bullets before bouncing around and eventually found his home in Detroit. And that's where the legend was built. In Motown, Wallace became the soul of the 2004 championship team, the one that shut down Kobe, Shaq, and the star-studded Lakers. 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, 5-time All-NBA defense, the ultimate enforcer. Wallace wasn't just good, he terrified people. And in 2021, he became the first undrafted player to make the Hall of Fame. No draft night? No problem. From one undrafted dog to another, let's talk about the man who built his entire brand around being overlooked. Fred VanVleet. Bet on yourself. That's not just Fred VanVleet's mantra, that's his blueprint. Coming out of Rockford, Illinois, VanVleet was smart, steady, and reliable. But reliable doesn't get you ranked. He was 6 feet tall on a good day, didn't have jaw-dropping bounce, and his mixtape wasn't exactly viral material. Big schools passed on him, so he took his talents to Wichita State, a program that didn't care about flash. They cared about wins, and with Fred running the point, they did plenty of that. Final Four in 2013, an undefeated regular season in 2014. VanVleet led, defended, and delivered, but still, undrafted in 2016. Most guys would crumble, but Fred, he doubled down. He signed with the Raptors, grinded through G League assignments, fought for every single minute, took charges, made smart passes, and slowly became a key piece. Then 2019 happened, Game 6 of the NBA Finals. VanVleet drops 22 points, including 5 three-pointers, each one more clutch than the last, and helps the Raptors win their first ever and one of the least expected championships in league history. A few years later, he was named an All-Star, signed a massive contract, and became the ultimate example of betting on yourself and cashing in big. Fred VanVleet never needed hype. He just needed a shot. Now, from the underrated to the underappreciated, because our next guy didn't come with buzz, but when the pressure hit, he delivered. Chris Middleton. Chris Middleton is the human version of don't judge a book by its cover. Out of high school, he was solid, smooth jumper, high IQ, but nothing about him screamed superstar. No viral plays, no wild dunks, just fundamental basketball. So he ends up at Texas A&M. 3 quiet seasons of steady improvement, but no draft night buzz. The Pistons took him 39th overall in 2012, but barely used him. Middleton was soon traded to Milwaukee and was seen as more of a throw-in piece, not much more. Except it was everything. In Milwaukee, Middleton put his head down and grinded. Got stronger, sharpened his mid-range, locked in on defense, and it culminated in 2021. NBA Finals. Giannis is dominating per usual, but who's hitting all the big shots when it's tight? Middleton, dropping 40 pieces. Cold-blooded. This guy showed the world what steady growth looks like, and his performance in the finals was the peak. Now he's a 3-time All-Star, an NBA champ, and one of the game's all-time clutch shooters. You don't always need flash, sometimes you just need fire, and Middleton's burned inside him for years before he finally got his chance to shine on the biggest stage. But now it's time for a wild ride. A guy who seemed like a lost cause, then became the league's block party host and an absolute legend at the bank. Hassan Whiteside. Hassan Whiteside had everything scouts drool over: size, bounce, timing. As a freshman at Marshall, he led the nation in blocks with 182, the kind of numbers you expect to see in 2K. The tools were obvious, the potential was massive, but NBA teams weren't convinced. Questions about his maturity, focus, and everything except his talent were all red flags. So, in the 2010 draft, he dropped to the second round. He was picked 33rd overall, and then quietly disappeared. Overseas. G League. Back overseas. China. Lebanon. The man had more stamps in his passport than minutes in the NBA. By 2024, he was out of the league, forgotten. Most people had written him off as a guy who had all the tools but couldn't put them together, until the Miami Heat called. And that changed everything. Whiteside returned and went off. In 2016, he led the NBA in blocks, then in rebounds. He was swatting shots like flies and grabbing boards like a magnet. Suddenly, the dude no one wanted had stats that couldn't be ignored, and received the massive contract to match. From gone to great, just like that. And now, it's time for a player who never fit the mold. Too small to be a center, too slow to be a guard, too loud for, well, just about everyone. Yet, somehow, he became the heartbeat of the most recent dynasty. Draymond Green. Draymond was always a high IQ, do-everything player, but scouts didn't know what to do with him. Coming out of Saginaw, Michigan, he wasn't flashy. He wasn't a YouTube sensation. He was just a winner. That earned him a spot at Michigan State under Tom Izzo. There, he was the guy doing everything: rebounding, defending, running the break, yelling at teammates and probably the refs, and making plays no stat sheet could capture. But scouts had questions. Heading into the 2012 NBA draft, the biggest knock was, what is he? Too short to guard centers, too slow to chase guards, and a jumper that made coaches nervous. Result? He slid to Golden State at the 35th pick. With the Warriors, Draymond didn't just find a role, he built a legacy. He became the emotional engine of a 4-time champion, Defensive Player of the Year, and a 4-time All-Star. Hall of Fame IQ. Trash talk level, elite. Draymond changed the way we think about positions and made being the glue guy a coveted role. Speaking of redefining positions, this next guy redefined what it meant to be a point guard, and it all started with one overlooked scholarship offer. Steve Nash. Nash didn't come from a basketball hotbed. Born in South Africa, raised in Canada, recruited by no one. Steve Nash wasn't just overlooked, he was practically invisible. His high school coach had to beg colleges to look his way, sending out tapes like an artist with a demo. 30-plus schools passed, except for one: Santa Clara. Coach Dick Davies saw the vision, took a chance, and Nash delivered. In his own words, Davey admitted he was nervous as hell, just hoping that no one else would see him. That's how under the radar Nash really was. Quick handle, knockdown shooter, and court vision from another dimension. He led Santa Clara to NCAA upsets and turned a tiny West Coast program into a March Madness problem. Still, come draft time in the all-time class of 1996, doubts. Too skinny, too slow. Played at a mid-major. But the Phoenix Suns took a chance at 15th overall, and what followed was one of the greatest careers ever for a point guard, 2 MVPs, 7 All-NBA selections, and the architect of one of the most revolutionary offenses the league has ever seen. The maestro who made passing cool again. Steve Nash proved that you don't need hype to become historic, you just need game. From one mid-major magician to another, this next player lit up the NCAA tournament and never looked back. CJ McCullum. Out of high school, McCullum looked more like a skinny shooter at open gym than a future NBA star. He was the definition of overlooked. No big game offers, no buzz. He didn't get the attention he deserved, so he took his talents to Lehigh University, a school that sounds more like an accounting firm than a basketball threat. But at Lehigh, CJ cooked. Buckets on buckets. Still, nobody paid real attention. Until March 16, 2012. Lehigh vs. Duke, NCAA tournament. McCullum dropped 30 points, pulled off a historic 15-2 upset of Duke, and let the world know, I am here. That one game didn't make his career, but it forced people to start watching. He went 10th in the 2013 NBA draft to Portland and became the perfect backcourt partner for another overlooked gem, Dame Lillard. CJ had handle like butter, a crafty mid-range, and has been a 20-point scorer for years. McCullum didn't just arrive, he surpassed all outside expectations. And finally, let's wrap it up with a guy who didn't just play with heart, he was the heart. Kyle Lowry. Lowry wasn't flashy, wasn't tall, wasn't anyone's top pick, but he was Philly tough, gritty, fearless, and always ready to dive on the floor. Villanova gave him a shot, and he made the most of it. 2 strong seasons, but nothing that screamed future NBA All-Star. The 2006 draft came around, and Lowry slipped to the 24th pick. He bounced from Memphis to Houston, mostly flying under the radar and almost out of the league. But once he got to Toronto, he locked in, and his career trajectory took off. Lowry became the Raptors' heartbeat, taking charges, making clutch plays, hitting big shots, and leading by example. The guy who always did the little things. And eventually those little things added up to a championship in 2019, silencing every doubt and every critic saying he'd never be that guy. 6-time All-Star, NBA champion, and arguably the greatest career Raptor of all time. Kyle Lowry, too small for the NBA, until his play became too big to ignore. These guys weren't handed anything. They earned everything. The rankings didn't matter. The hype didn't matter. What mattered was work, patience, opportunity, and proving critics wrong over and over again. Because in the end, talent gets you noticed, but heart, that's what gets you remembered. So, who'd we miss? Who else belongs on this list of overlooked legends? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified for new videos. And if you like this one, check out our video on the greatest college players who flopped in the NBA. You won't believe who made that list.